amazing how public art sits at the crossroads of kind of all the fault lines of culture in the city, and we'll see that as we get into things today. Let me bring up our panelists and the people who will join us today. First, we have Dorka Keene, who is well known for her own company, Keene on Art. She's also in the Arts Commission, and Dorka has been doing a great deal of work pioneering kind of how one pushes the edge of what public art is and bringing new kinds of art and technologies in. Very effectively were corralling people in to support the Baylights when we had no idea what it was or why. Next up is Tyra Fennell, who leads Impact City, which is Imprint City. Thank you. Very important. So this is a strong community organization in Bayview, Hunters Point, which is both about inclusivity and expressing a form of art in one part of the city that can be shared with the rest and with the nation, and kind of represents very much of the community side of public art. Also from the very kind of bottom-up community, almost transgressive side of things, artist Finch, a street artist, and a big believer that the way that kind of an awful lot of us experience art is through public, because not that many people go to museums. And finally with us today is a developer, Enrique Landa, who is with Associate Capital and is developing a large project called Power Station here in Pier 70, and which has the opportunity to be one of the largest pieces of public art that we might have. And what I think is fascinating about this group is we have two people who come at it from more institutionally, kind of a Arts Commission and 1% Fund, and two people who come at this very, very much bottoms up. And that really gets to, I think, a lot of the character in the city. And as kind of Bruce said earlier, from the very start, public art in this town has been subject to controversy. In the very early days of the Arts Commission, when Coit Tower went up, it was subject to not one but two controversies. First, whether it was any good and should be put up, or was an inside job or blight. And then secondly, when the WPA murals showed up, an entire political fight over was that subversive, transgressive, should it happen, or was it a celebration of our values? And I think San Francisco's always had a sense that we like to push the weird, the what's new, the experimental. And yet I think we always have the complex that maybe we're succumbing to the less diverse or the bland, or we're not fulfilling that mission. I think that tension continues right on up through the article that we read this morning. There's a piece in the National Review, I don't know if you saw that one yesterday, that was a kind of a right-wing attack on San Francisco for perhaps not being progressive enough. Let's get started. What I asked everyone to do today was to share with us a little bit of what they're up to, because it's visual, and also express kind of what's their theory of change. You know, public art's always trying to accomplish something for the community. It's trying to accomplish something economically or culturally, or to lift us up. So I asked everyone to share both a little bit of their work and what is it your theory of change, what we're trying to accomplish here. And I thought, Dorka, I'd start with you, because your work has been involved in a lot of development here, and also while you're not representing them here, you sit on the Arts Commission, which kind of underlies a lot of what we're up to here. So I'm going to start with you, and there we go. Take us away.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you all for being here so early. So I work at sort of three parts, at the intersection of three areas in the public art realm, with private clients, with the Arts Commission, and also I started a nonprofit called Sights Unseen, which is activating public spaces in the urban way, the neighborhood, with public art. How many of you have seen the Hank Willis Thomas neon piece across the street from Moab, Love Over Rules? That was Hank's first public artwork in the United States, and That's one of the things that I really enjoy doing in my work, is working with artists who have never worked in the public realm before and helping them translate their work into either temporary or permanent works, and using materials perhaps that they've never used and being able to reach audiences that they've never accessed before. I'm very interested in art because I believe it's one of the main reasons people live where they do. It's the fourth largest industry in San Francisco. I strongly believe in art as an economic driver. It brought in last year $1.5 billion into the city. It creates 40,000 jobs last year. So it is a major reason why people live here, and it's a major reason how people work and function in the city. So I was appointed to the Arts Commission, I think right before the Bay Lights. After I did my own work, I partnered with an artist named Brian Goggin, and I don't know how many of you have seen a piece on the corner of Columbus and Broadway, Language of the Birds, but that was a piece that we collaborated on. I was commissioned by the Arts Commission, and it was the first public-private partnership the Arts Commission had ever done. Nervously, we raised additional money on our own for that project, and I really realized how doing that kind of work allowed me to engage with the community in ways that I never had. We had the Chinatown community, we had the Italians in North Beach, and we had other neighborhood groups in there, so it really was this effort of listening to people and also coming up then with an idea that maybe they wouldn't have thought of, but that really spoke to them and spoke to their community. When I started my consulting company, I realized that there was this incredible opportunity in San Francisco that we have this legislation, this 1% for art, which is a requirement for developers in downtown and South Market who are required to spend 1% of their art construction costs on public art. And I realized that a lot of developers maybe didn't have a lot of knowledge about art, and so I could help them think about their sites and how art could help brand their site, could also help attract their site, and also bring attraction to the city itself. So for me, it's been this incredible opportunity to work with a group of people who are making a huge difference on our landscape and being able to also impact that landscape. So I've had the opportunity to work with a variety of different developers, including Avalon Bay. I'm now working with the Warriors on their new arena. I'm working with Uber on their new campus. I just started working with Brookfield on their Pier 70 project. I'm working with in Emeryville on the Emeryville Public Market. So a lot of large-scale projects, mixed-use projects. So it's been a lot of fun for me to do that. And on the Arts Commission, we have a 2% art requirement for all civic construction. So whenever we think about all this development, it does bring an incredible amount of money for public art. And in San Francisco, we're benefiting from that at the Arts Commission, for example, with Moscone Center. I think some of you have seen some of the new art that we just had installed there, including a new Leo Villarreal piece. And we're redoing the Southwest Terminal at the airport, where we have $11 million for art, and the art that we're going to be rolling out is really tremendous. And one of the things that I love about the Arts Commission is the diversity of the artists that we commission. We have an excellent record on the artists that we commission. Half are women, 1/3 are people of color, and we really work with 70% of our artists are local artists. We also work with national and international artists, and we provide artists opportunities to engage in the public realm in ways that they would have never been able to before.
We have several examples here which will us to.
Okay, you want to prepare it? So
there's Bay Lights.
This is the Bay Lights, which was a private project, as you all know. It was really a miracle project. This is Salesforce Tower, which I think also you all know. Client was Boston Properties, and Jim Campbell was the artist. This is one of my favorite artworks that we commissioned at the Arts Commission that I was instrumental in accessing. This is a Yo-Yo Kusama, who is probably the most famous female artist alive today, and she's Japanese. And I thought she really spoke to sort of our relationship with the East. And it is the most photographed piece of public art in the city. Adults and kids love it. This is a piece that I did with Brian Goggin called Caruso's Dream. I think you all may know Caruso. Enrico Caruso was the famous opera tenor who came to San Francisco and sang here the night before the earthquake. This is our first piece that we did, which is Language of the Birds, which is the piece that won Best Public Art in the United States. And that's Hank's piece.
Quick question, when you did Bay Lights, part of what you do is you bring in new forms and you're trying to push kind of new forms of public art. And sometimes you're doing things people don't quite understand. And that must have been the case when you were trying to convince people to turn the bridge into a piece of art and then have folks pay for it.
Oh, people thought we were crazy. It was also during the time when the city was raising funds for the America's Cup, so there was a lot of competition for money. What really helped us was when Leo developed his rendering so that people could actually see it. I think it's really hard for people to visualize art before it's actually physically there, and that was the game changer. And once we had the artwork up, because we had raised, I raised $8 million, and the idea was that it was just going to be up for 2 years, but really always in the back of our minds, we wanted it to be up permanently. Once it was up, people fell in love with it, and then the idea that it was going to come down was what activated people to give the last $4 million so that it would stay permanently. And I think that's one of the challenges with public art, is that people have a really hard time visualizing what could potentially be there and trusting that an artist is going to come up with an amazing idea. There's one of the challenges with public art, especially when you're working with community, is that people may have an idea of what they want. And so the idea of releasing that and allowing an artist to vision and then coming back to them and is a challenge for a lot of people, especially people who haven't been engaged a lot with art. And what I've always found is that artists tend to come up with ideas that we would never, ever think of, and they're working outside of a framework that most of us aren't thinking in that way.
Thanks. Tyra, your work is all about working with the community that isn't always been pulled into expressing itself, and so you're both working with that community to express it to the rest of the city, and almost for it to explore and learn about its own art and its own capabilities. So tell us a little bit about what you're up to within Print City.
Hi, so I'm Tyra Fennell. Quickly about my arts background. I'm a classically trained cellist. That's my first instrument. I started playing cello at 6 and did that for most of my youth until I became a musical theater major and went on and became a songwriter. I lived in Europe for many years where I was a songwriter, as a working artist, performing artist, and a songwriter. So my background is in the performing arts largely and music, and that's still where I heavily lean. I got recruited here after graduate school to work at the Arts Commission, where I was for 5 years, and because of investment from the PUC in the Southeast sector, a lot of capital was going into the Bayview Hunters Point. And so I was introduced to the Bayview, mainly because I'm Black and I wanted to go to a Black neighborhood, so I was already acclimated to Bayview, but in my capacity at the Arts Commission, I was professionally introduced to the Bayview and started doing work there. And one thing I discovered being in the city is that the city is a different mechanism, and it's harder to be nuanced in what you do in communities like the Bayview Hunters Point in the government context. The government has a role to play, but sometimes to get certain things done, you gotta step outside of government to do it, and that's what I essentially did. After being at the Arts Commission for a number of years, I decided that I'd be better suited to do what I needed to do for the Bayview Hunters Point with a not-for-profit. So I started in Print City about 4.5 years ago, and our goal is to go into underutilized areas, not just Bayview, but Bayview is our first sort of experiment. And we go into these underutilized areas, a lot of times industrial areas that have local businesses that are kind of struggling with foot traffic, and we create art experiences to bring foot traffic, to sort of change the aesthetic of the community and things of that nature. So as I said, we're hyper-focused in Bayview Hunters Point, but we currently have projects in other areas of the city. For example, we're going to be doing Japantown, Peace Plaza, which is going to be really exciting. The sumo wrestling match is my favorite. But in any case, so the interesting thing about Bayview is that it is a historically Black community, but it is very diverse. It's actually majority Asian American at this point, but it is known to be a historically Black community. And so with the accelerated out-migration of the Black community, there's a lot of fight to retain some culture or some retention of arts and culture in the community that reflect that history. And so what I've done is a layer of things, what I'm doing. One, I work with the city to designate Bayview as an African American Culture District, which just got designated last year, but that was a long haul. Also working with the citywide arts community, including the Arts Commission, to get Proposition E passed, which basically allocates or reallocates funds meant for the arts back to the arts and leaves it there. And part of that are the cultural districts around the city, including obviously the African American Cultural District. But while all that was percolating, I started conceptualizing and building different art events in the Bayview, such as the Bayview Live Festival, which is our biggest event of the year. My thought was there's no festival in San Francisco solely dedicated to urban art, except for Outside Lands, who may have urban artists, but it's not an urban arts festival. And I thought, what better place to have this than the Bayview Hunters Point? So I worked on that, and that's been going for about 4 years. Southside Festival, which specifically works with local community performers and gives them a platform to perform. It's a much smaller activation. And then we worked on something called the Spray View, which you see a photo of now. This is on Egbert Avenue and 3rd Street. And it's basically a block of murals. And thank you to Finch. Finch actually, I don't know if you can see his piece, but he did a honey bear in the Spray View. And that's become a very popular space for people to come and take selfies, and essentially works as marketing for the neighborhood. So, and this is a picture from Bayview Live, I think 2 years ago. Additionally, a lot of Burning Man artists are in Bayview because there's hangar space, and I'm a burner, as mentioned. And so when I approached them and said, where are you doing your pre-compression events? And they were like, well, we do it in Mission, or we do it at the Crucible. And I said, why don't you do anything in Bayview? I mean, after all, you work here. And they said, well, there's just not enough space here and not enough big warehouse buildings to do anything. And I said, well, why don't we just shut down a block and do a block party? And so we created Bayview Spark, which has been going on for a few years as well. And last year we were blessed to work with Burning Man to bring pre-compression to Bayview, which was about 3,000 people. So all of that gets people to support the local economy, to come out and patronize the community, and just a feel-good piece. So essentially that's what I do. I think I've spoken enough. I'll take more questions later, but essentially in a nutshell, that's what I do and that's what I'm working on.
And your work is both visual, but also cultural and creative festivals. So there's both a visual expression, but also almost having the community find out about its own form and celebrating that.
Yeah, so another layer of what I do, because I'm a musician, I can actually write music and read it in the whole nine. I studied music for a long time. And so what I learned, especially with artists that are not institutional artists, when I say it's a euphemism for the symphony, classical musicians, blah, blah, blah. In the Black community, a lot of the young people listen to hip hop and R&B, and those are art forms too, but they're not largely funded by large granting organizations. They're not really seen largely as quote unquote legitimate art, but that's the art that resonates with these kids in the community I'm from, and that's what they're doing. So if I go up to Hunters Point, I went to a listening party in Bayview of someone's album, and the album was awesome. It was awesome. These kids do these albums and they just leave them because there's no one there helping them figure out okay, where do I perform? How do I get this out there? How do I market it? How do I translate this album to a live show, which is very different. So another thing that we're doing is artist development by way of our festivals. We give platforms to these young people to perform. I don't say young, I mean 25. These young people to perform. But what I also do is I try to expose them to instrumentation. Okay, I know you're a rapper, but I just don't want to see you walking up and down the stage to a track. So let's go to Revolution Cafe, let's meet the Classical Revolution, and let's see if we can get the string quartet to interpret one of your songs, and let's do a showcase with them. That's the sort of thing that I'm working on a micro level, and that's the kind of nuance I'm talking about, because the young people in the Bayview have a lot of talent, they just don't have a lot of access, and there's not a lot of capital funding what they see as art. And so that's what I work on as well, so I kind of see both worlds as a former cellist and also as a Black urban kid. And so I see myself as a linchpin between the funding world and the young people in the community, the young artists in the community.
By the way, as we move on, there's a fascinating Burning Man connection across everyone here, as there often is in the city. You have been, and of course, the work of Bay Light started there. You hosted Burning Man pre-compression. Enrique, your facility hosted decompression. And Finch's work has been at Burning Man. So Burning Man kind of serves as a cross-current piece of jazz, always in the background of the city. Finch, you come to us from the strong, I am a street artist, and art will fly from anywhere and should tradition.
Yeah, so hi there. I'm Great Art, Liam from Finch. Yeah, so last year, 1.2 million people went to the Museum of Modern Art in San Francisco, but about 26 million people came through San Francisco. These numbers, like the roughly 5% of visitors and residents go to the museum, is basically common across every city I've looked at in the US. And what is kind of observed is that a lot of people don't have a relationship with fine art. They listen to music, they're super into hip hop, and if you ask somebody, probably anybody in this room can name multiple hip hop artists. Even if that's not your main genre, you know who Jay-Z is or whatever. But if you ask the average person on the street to name, even a single, really successful professional artist, say somebody who makes $1 million a year off their art or more, not that money is the perfect metric, it's just some metric. People can't name usually a single person. I do this at parties, and it's not the fun party game. And so, I grew up with a stepmother who was a professional sculptor. My mom and dad both collect artwork. My grandfather collects artwork, or collected. And so, I was kind of cool. I was just in the household, and then when I graduated from college, I started collecting artwork, and I realized that none of my friends did. And then, of course, I kind of had seen Banksy, and I was like, well, if people aren't going to go to the museums, then we kind of have to reach people wherever they are. And so I was feeling like I wanted to do some cool things for the city, so I started kind of going out at nighttime and painting things on public space, usually parks. So if we step back one photo for 1 second, this is in Bull Valley. This, as far as I know, is the first piece of illegal public art in a park to be actively maintained by the city. When there's graffiti around, it gets maintained, it gets buffed, and then the person, whoever it is, I've never been.
Where is that exactly, Finch?
Somewhere in Bull Valley. Just let it go with a paintbrush and clean up all the edges, which is fun. And then jump to the next one. Next slide is these dog walkers work in another park that is unnamed. And so the city had painted these kind of lumpy German shepherds, and so I kind of started swapping out German shepherds. Start with the poodle. This is the Jeff Koons dog, obviously. And so a lot of the idea here is that you don't need to have some rich cultural history of the select elite. You don't have to know the works of Francis Bacon and Mozart and whatever to understand this artwork. It's positive, it's inclusive, and it's going to reach your average person. Yeah, this is the first legal mural I painted. Took me, this is probably a theme of something that I will reflect back on. This is the unmanned Pacific Gas and Electric Substation on 19th and San Carlos. This has been rotated since, but it took me 400 days from when I started attempting to get permission to paint this wall until I actually got permission to paint it. And then it took me 4 days to paint the first mural. It's actually twice as wide as this. I wasn't very fast back then. I paint this mural even faster now. And so these kind of, these scenarios are extremely common. Like the cost of doing a lot of public art, especially if you use aerosol paint, or just even roller paint, has fallen tremendously, but the institutions haven't updated this. And so there's this idea that art needs to be $200,000 projects that only go to a select set of people who have already done projects of that size, whereas you could do $100,000, $2,000 projects, or even $500 projects, and get a lot of artists who are super excited to create work and can do it in a couple of hours and make things that are actually quite impactful. I just kind of threw these in. I also do fine art. That's actually how I pay my bills at the end of the day. So paintings on wood. I paint a lot of honey bears. Reference to Magritte for that. And then, is that the last slide? Oh yeah, and so then I kind of got into painting murals. This stuff is actually commissioned and legal. And so this is on mission between 8th and 9th. It's called Dreamers, and it's supposed to just kind of support children regardless of their background. Honey bears theme after things children want to do when they grow up. But yeah, that was the first iteration of the Pacific Gas and Electrical that I painted and rotated it. Oh yeah, I have a bunch of slides apparently. Okay, this is a mural in Chicago for the Chicago Transit Authority. That I painted out there, just more big art stuff. Day one in California poppies, that was their choice. So we spread some California into the cold winters of Chicago.
This raises interesting questions. Is art the process or the context of publicly engaging, or is art something that is curated and an arts commission looks at and goes and picks the best among them, right? Because we have here examples of everything from rapidly creating things and expressing and pushing kind of emerging forms of street art to curating and working with kind of the best known people, and that raises an interesting fault line kind of at the core of both what is it art and what do we have to achieve publicly.
Yeah, I'm here with the ampersand. It's street art and the MoMA. It's commissioned and more populist, right? These things don't have to. And I feel like I want to be a gateway drug to bigger art institutions, right? Like you start with the Honey Bear and you end up with Francis Bacon.
And my mom used to give this analogy. She was trying to raise a egalitarian home, but she would say, men and women are like two wings of a bird. You both need wings to fly. And that's how kind of I look at all these different aspects of art. Like, there's a place for what I do, there's a place for what Dorka does. It doesn't have to compete with one another necessarily, though there are some there are some variables that kind of force that narrative just organically in terms of how the funding world sees these different art forms, like how the funding world will see a large scale piece of public art, which Fitch was talking about, versus street art. But both are needed, both art can, there's room for everyone. And Dorka has just as hard of a time raising money for the Bay Lights as maybe I would have raising money for Baby Live, because essentially art is something that we all have to fight for, having a seat at the table, because people see art as like a side part to other functional things in society. So.
I also just wanted to say, just because work is a commission doesn't mean it's a famous artist. And especially at the Arts Commission, we really helped start and nurture artist career. We work with a lot of local artists who got their maybe first experience doing the posters on Market Street. Then I don't know if you know, but we have a gallery. You have a gallery, actually. The Arts Commission art is your art. It's your collection. You have a collection that's valued at over $100 million. And you have a gallery in the Veterans War Memorial Building where we put on, it's all local artists, basically, pretty much all that we represent there. And we give a lot of our local artists their first shows, and then they're not usually, but sometimes picked up by a gallery here. And then they have an opportunity to do large-scale public art. I don't know how many of you have seen Val Britton's piece, which is the giant 56-foot glass piece in between Terminal 2 and 3. It's under the tower. But she's an artist who cut paper. And she we thought her work was so interesting, and we thought, how can we translate this work? And so we worked with her, sent her to Germany to the leading glass fabricator in the world, where she learned how to work with glass. And she did this amazing piece. And she's now gone on to do a whole other series of public art. She's been picked up by a gallery. So I think that these institutions also have a way of helping local artists. And even with my clients, a lot of my clients now come to me and say, we don't really like what our corporate interior art consultant is doing. What can you do? And so what I now do is I do these programs where I commission or purchase all local artists for the interiors, and we put a little catalog together so when folks are buying their apartments or coming and moving in, we can give them the catalog, which shows where they can buy the work if they like it that's in the public spaces, and then they can buy them for their apartments. And so this has been kind of a little movement that I've started with my private clients, and it's a way for them to be able to show that they're also supporting the local art scene.
Enrique, you are leading a large development on the Central Waterfront that has in it something that has the possibility of becoming kind of a very large and unique a place where people can collect, and you're just beginning to think about how to turn that into a piece of public art.
Yeah, I'm Enrique Landa, as mentioned mentioned here, I'm a developer, and my company, Auden, is developing the Ventura Power Station, which is where for the last 150 years, San Francisco got more than 50% of its power. Through a public process, the power station was shut down in 2011, and it was always designed and seen as a great development site. As you can see, sort of along then, and I sort of brought prettier renderings today, but we got this huge, massive property. It's 21 acres on the water, now 29, and let's just stop on that side there. And in the middle of it, we've got a 300-foot former chimney. And if you were standing on 7th Street, right at Market, looking right down, you would see it just framed right in the middle of it. If you come up 280, you've seen it a million times. It's not a landmark in the traditional sense of the historic parallel, it might be one day, but it's a landmark the way we've defined the waterfront. It's also a 300-foot sculpture. And so for us, I really thought about the idea of why public art matters. Public art matters because it's a huge welcome sign. Many times when you see a building and put public art in the front, it's a welcome mat. And for this project, what it really was about, one of the values of this project was to reopen with Brookfield, our neighbors to the north, about 70 acres of waterfront was completely closed to San Francisco basically since the gold rush. All of these sites were industrial. All these sites had various degrees of sugar manufacturing, electricity generation, industrial production, war production, made ships. And now they've left us these remnants. I'm really fortunate. My hero is Marcel Duchamp, and he'd like to repurpose things and use them as pieces of art. Well, in this, we got left with a 300-foot chimney. And so for us, this is our welcome sign. This is our way to tell people, hey, there's life here on the waterfront. Come and check this out. You wouldn't necessarily be there. So that structure that you see next to it is actually the power station that closed in 2011 and we intend to repurpose as a hotel. And part of what we wanted to do with the hotel is you can get all the way to the top of it, and we actually lead tours once a month. They're on our website. You can just look up the VenturaPowerStation.com and lead tours and you can take a look. But that gives you a 360-degree view. Sure, you can see downtown and all its magnificence and the new Warriors Arena and all sorts of things. But you also get a chance to see the connection to the south side of the city that you don't often get a view of. So you see the cranes at the shipyard, you see part of South Ventura, so you get this really neat view that we thought needed to be public. The chimney behind it, we thought, gosh, once you live there, what are you going to do with it? Well, as they mentioned, we did host Burning Man, we host Burning Man Decompression. It's a really fun call to your insurance company when you say, I know you insure power stations. I'm going to have a rave with 12,000 people in pyrotechnic art, and that's going to be fun. One of the writers of the policies that I had to be there the entire time, which was sort of funny, and I had to show that I was. But one of the neat things that I saw, it's difficult conversations to explain, but the neatest thing that I saw was watching just people. This is a site that's closed, and we can't open it to the public for temporary activations because most of the time it's a construction zone or remediation zone. But it was really wonderful to see artists interpreting the site, lighting different parts. They took that chimney and lit it, and all night they had different camps that were working with it, and they were shooting up just different pieces of light. And it was really fun just to see what people tagged afterwards of all the different ways that they took this chimney and started interpreting it. So what we're in the process of now is sort of starting a listening tour with different artists, meeting different artists and saying, hey, we've got a 300-foot chimney, what would you do? And just prompt the idea. The idea being to see what comes back, and the ideas that are starting to come back are really interesting, whether it's some kind of a public gallery, whether it's an art piece, whether it's in combination of the two. So that's what we're doing. You can kind of slide through the rest of the slides and show some images. These are pretty developer images, that's boring. But this is, there we go, stop there. So this is kind of what we're envisioning as a site. This is this PC and this column is the lights on the stat board. It was really exciting when it basically looked like a lava lamp for a while. It looked on fire. They did some different stuff. But you see an idea that you're going to welcome people into the most inefficient building in San Francisco, which is 750 square feet. It's 39 feet circumference at the base, 12-foot circumference at the top. No, you can't take an elevator to the top, you tried. But you're going to go up and it's going to be up in the sky. Like, what the hell is this place? And for San Francisco, that moment of wonder is what we want to have to just bring people to this part of the waterfront. Dogpatch is a community that has a ton of public art. Certainly there's a historic relationship with Art at Pier 70. The Minnesota Street Project is a wonderful addition to our community. And so we kind of want to do our little piece, and we're working on that. So that's for us, this has been how we're trying to plan our public art piece. I don't know what the stack's going to be. I know it'll be there. PG&E, though it has a very bad reputation of setting the world on fire, actually does know how to build things relatively well. And that piece is that the stack is built to last for 200 years. So we're going to help foment that, and we'll build a big public park around it. And that's, for us, it matters because it'll be a sign that says, hey, welcome, come see what we're doing here.
You know, there's something about kind of finding the unexpected or playing with prototypes that runs through all of this, which is sometimes we don't know when we want to experiment. Of course, much of our culture in the city is experimental, whether it's experimenting with software, experimenting with music. I'm thinking of the work that we did a few years ago with Market Street prototyping, where we had 50 groups put up temporary prototypes of Market Street just as a sense for what might be possible there as an input into the planning process. And that's a little bit of what you're doing here. It's like you invite all these burners in, and it's like project stuff, what might it be? And I think, Dorcas, a lot of your work has been working with people who are doing new processes and that people might not think of as things that sit in the city. So I guess one of my questions is, to what degree are we an innovative leader in public art? I mean, we think of ourselves in the city, but then we sometimes have a complex that we're behind in art. So as we look at what we're doing in public art, are we pushing the edge and trying all sorts of new things and processes, or are we a city with much catching up to do?
I would say in the public art realm that we are one of the leaders in the country, and we definitely, in the next couple of years, as the program continues to roll out, we will, I think, be one of the leading cities regarding public art. I think we are constantly doing cutting-edge public art in the Arts Commission, but certainly in the private sector. I mean, if you look at what's happening with Salesforce Tower, with the Bay Lights, and what is going to be Oliver Elias's piece, which I unfortunately can't show you, but I'm dying to, which is going to be unveiled this fall with the Warriors. I think one of the challenges with public art is you have to deal with issues of maintenance and it being in the public realm, and the challenges around working with new media. So that's constantly always an edge that we're trying to push. It costs more money to have a piece like that's on top of Salesforce Tower than having a bronze sculpture that you plop into a plaza. But I think we have moved away from that. And I think if you look at the work, for example, out at the airport, you'll see that that's not the kind of work that we're commissioning at all. And I think working with private clients, often there's this idea like, oh, let's do this giant mural. One of the things that I try to show, both in the public and the private sector and with the nonprofit work that I've been doing in the Urban Way neighborhood, is that there's so many different things that you can do in public art. And I, especially with my own work, I love hanging things off of buildings. I mean, we hung 13 glass and steel pianos, over a sidewalk. And we had to get a variance for that, and that was, planning and the building department almost had a heart attack. So I'm really interested in pushing the boundaries of public art and working with local artists who are thinking in new and different ways and thinking of using new and different materials and providing them with that opportunity. And because public art has those kind of budgets, we're able to support artists doing work that they might not otherwise be able to do on their own or with grant money. So I think, public art is pretty exciting here in San Francisco.
Finch, when you and I were talking, you were doing comparisons to Wynwood and Brooklyn. I'm wondering if we were pushing ourselves.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I see, and I'm sure Jordan runs into the same thing, is that I see what I call a lack of a culture of participation amongst landlords, where people just aren't that excited to have murals. Like when I started trying to paint legal murals, or I would just walk door to door to buildings with good walls, and I'd say, hey, you can wall sign, my portfolio, and I had people that would refuse to even respond to me. They would just deadpan me and look at me and shake their head until I just awkwardly backed out of the building. As I was trying to get that Mission Street mural, I pitched. That was the 7th landlord where I got the support of the main tenant in the building to pitch the landlord on a mural that I would pay for, by the way. And I, all the insurance and the swing stage and everything, this was happening to get lucky that, on roll number 7 of the dice, the landlord is a big art lover, and it was an instant yes on this one, but, the previous 6 didn't pan out. And so when you go to somewhere like the Arts District in Los Angeles, or Wynwood in Miami, or Bushwick in Brooklyn, it's not just the like hip restaurants and coffee shops that have art on them. It's the youth storage facility and the bank. You know, like how many banks in San Francisco have like exterior public art on them? And so I kind of feel that we can, it's just about engaging people where, you know, when they see something like the Bay Bridge lights, they're like, oh, I'm excited about public art. And, oh, I have this resource, like maybe I can do something with it. I have this power, like maybe I can do something with it. Like these kind of ideas aren't widespread in my experience in the city based on just my dealings with, you know, the people that actually own the building, who are the people that make the ultimate, or have the ultimate say over whether or not these projects get done.
And Tyra, as you started doing work in the Bayview, did you find that the neighborhood's relationship or the kids' relationship to art started changing as you started bringing in festivals and kind of exposing the
Yeah, because they felt validated. Like, I think art is really subjective, and I can't stress enough. I went to like undergrad at the new school. We were like all liberal and everything. And one thing we had, the theme through my whole undergraduate experience was understand your location. And I don't feel we do that enough as a society. We're like, it's an invisibility thing. I understand my location as a black kid raised in an upper middle class black family, going into the Bayview, which is historically working class, lower class black community, to know enough that I'm gonna have some blind spots. Even though we share different same racial identity, class-wise, a lot of the young people I work with, we share a different class identity. And so I hire people that can fill those voids, so I'm really being inclusive in how I see things. I don't feel that happens enough in public art in San Francisco, and I feel, depending on who you ask, whether San Francisco is the most progressive with public art, a lot of the street artists, a lot of communities of color would say no, it's becoming more commercial, sort of developers pay for the art, but it goes on their site. It's not really leading out to the community necessarily, it's not necessarily leading out to artists that could really use the opportunity. A lot of street artists, muralists like that are largely in communities of color. So I think we need to be careful about, like, you know, brushing our shoulders off around public art and constantly be evaluating our location, how we're picking artists, how we're funding art, how we're validating art. Because a lot of times I feel like the producers of art is a class disconnect. And so that's kind of what I hope to bring to the young people, and not just young people, the artists that have been overlooked for a long time in the Bayview Hunters Point, like giving them opportunities. For example, I produced Bayview's first podcast, and I hired the young people in the community, young people meaning 25, to host a podcast, to talk about content that we're discussing in the city through their lens, like police bias phone calls, the cannabis equity program, and then feature them on the podcast. And we're doing our first live taping outside of the community at Airbnb. So those young people, 25, will be at Airbnb, they'll do a live podcast, and they'll perform in front of an audience that they would never have had access to necessarily. So that's how I see my role, and that's something that I think is really overlooked in the city ecosystem, arts ecosystem.
You do an amazing job of hiring kids, the interns, like so the artists creating
Yeah.
something is a part of it. So that's the whole economic side of inclusive.
Interns, not only artist apprentices, performing and visual, but they work on festivals, they come and do summer interns in the offices. Not everyone's going to be an artist, but someone can certainly work on the administrative side, learn how to run an event. I have a producer from Hunters Point that does produce my podcast and all my video content. So there are other aspects of the arts and working in the arts outside of being an actual practitioner.
I think as we said at the beginning of today, this conversation is at once about rich public art in the city and at a time when we're becoming a bit more homogeneous and unaffordable, and therefore the communities that lead to flourishing of this stuff are kind of at risk. So this is a kind of a pivotal time. As we wrap up, everybody, we have in the room today kind of the power center of public space in San Francisco, the Parks Alliance and its friends. So I'm wondering, as we wrap up, if we might kind of maybe starting with you coming in this direction, what would be either your request of people in the city or approaches we should do differently for the next couple of years to create kind of an even richer appreciation or pushing through to kind of get through some of the barriers that we're facing right now? And I'd love to just hear from everybody, kind of almost to set an agenda for all of us.
You hear a lot of frustration from people who are trying to provide public art and make it go quickly, and whether that's permitting, the legal, the cost, the fundraising. So one of the things that I think would be great on the agenda is to help streamline that process. We're streamlining a lot of interagency things within the housing market now. But what Finch was saying, putting up a mural that comes with all kinds of questions and issues for a landlord, if it was streamlined, easy, and permanent quickly, and had maybe a short duration or something that would help. So I think that's something we're doing at the power station, allowing for public art to exist in places. So we're providing canvases, for lack of a better place, permitting street art in advance, so it's always allowed, permitting murals, so it's always allowed, so that issue gets done in advance. But I think if there was a way to help do that so it didn't take such a big lift to host a public thing, it would be great. And that would be my wish list.
I have two. One of them is that you have an increased focus on temporary art. It's oftentimes very hard for people to get their mind wrapped around that this is going to last forever. And there are some things that are so expensive you can't do them in a way that would be temporary. But there's a project I've been curating at Alamo Square in the last maybe 9 months, where we took construction fencing, put up a bunch of 8x8 frames on it, and artists are painting 8x8 murals that rotate. And something like an 8x8 foot mural takes a person in half a day, 2 days, and they get to kind of express themselves, get a platform for their voice, and then it's up for 6 to 9 months and then it rotates out. Again, the cost of these sort of art projects is low enough where people need to freak out about, oh, the neighbors don't be like, oh, it's going to be here forever, and they don't like it because they don't like flowers. That's one piece. The other piece is that one of the issues that I see as I try to make projects happen is that we have entangled funding and space. And so, I've been trying to lobby the BART system for 3.5 or 4 years for our projects. And so it's kind of like, I don't like the public service of public art and the public service of public transit are not the same. And the commissioners are like, well, should we have toilets or art? I'm like, toilets, come on, we need toilets. But there's money elsewhere to fund projects. And so sometimes if you have these spaces that are great, like I would say that there's an inefficiency in the market where when there's a public art project, the benefit accrues to 3 entities or 4 depending. One is the populace who gets to enjoy the art. Second is the artist who gets a platform for their work to be seen. The third is the landlord who gets the property value improved. And the fourth, if there is a tenant who's a business, they get whatever increased visibility on social media, increased attention to their business. However, the expectation of funding comes either exclusively from the landlord if there's no tenant, or exclusively from the tenant if there's a tenant. And so it's like if the populace is driving most of the benefit, if the sum of these benefits is larger than the cost, the project should happen. But sometimes it's not large enough to the tenant or not large enough to the landlord to justify it, and so it just doesn't happen. And so you can come at it with crowdfunding, or you come at it with grants, or kind of having some other way to fund these projects. So if you do have a space, it's not just like you need to, just opening up, having a process just to open access to spaces, I think would be hugely impactful to artists, that if they do have a vision, to try to navigate their way of making it happen. I think it would be wonderful.
So, as I mentioned earlier, the Public Utilities Commission is going to be doing a lot of investments specifically in the Bayview, and I've been working with them to select the artists on their different sites. And my concern with any development, especially in neighborhoods that don't have a lot of advocacy around art, is that the benefit of the money for art will live on the campus of that development site and not really trickle on the commercial corridor and pockets of the neighborhood that will aesthetically change the trajectory of the neighborhood. So my hope for public art moving forward, specifically in marginalized areas of the city, is that when development comes in and they reinvest in art, they just don't plant the art on their campus. They really think, a lot of times they do that for cost because they can incorporate the construction costs in with the art with their development site. But I would challenge them to potentially, if they need to decrease the investment, but the investment can go beyond their campus, it can have much more of an impact. The community aesthetic can reflect the neighborhood in a more holistic way. So that's like my big hope for public art in San Francisco, specifically in outlier neighborhoods.
So Tyra and Finch touched on 2 important issues with our legislation, both the private legislation and the public, the 1% and the 2%, which is that it requires permanent public art on site. So the opportunity to fund temporary artwork is very, very limited. And so anything that you can do, whether individually or through your foundation, or you decide voluntarily to have a program through your company that funds temporary art, I think is really key. The other thing is, the Arts Commission funds a lot of art not through its public art program. We fund individual artists, we fund nonprofits, etc. So, I could spend 3 hours talking about what the Arts Commission does, but the public art component is only one component of the funding for arts across the city that we do. And then the last thing I would just say is, individually, go out and buy some art. Go to your local galleries, support local artists. That will make the biggest difference for artists in this city.
Okay, it's time to go to audience for audience Q&A. Yes.
Hi, Kathy with Gizmo Art Production. I went to Sprayview and I
Oh,
loved
yay!
it. It was fantastic. I loved it so much that when I went back to Mission High, where I work with a lot of students, I asked them, some of them who grew up in the area, what they thought. They said they loved the artwork, but they said, unfortunately, it won't last. I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, the city will paint over it. They don't like our graffiti art. I was shocked. I was like, no, that's not the idea. Anyway, so that's one point. I wanted to thank you for your work that you're doing.
I just thought,
Really, really appreciate it. That being said, I think that a lot of the art we see in galleries might be open to us in this room, but not to a lot of the inhabitants of the city. So I love the permanent public artwork that everyone's going to see, and I just want to say thank you for supporting that.
My question's for Dorka. Dorka, do you think there's an opportunity to recraft some of the 1%, 2% legislation so that the city could have a pool for more temporary art? It is the most accessible form of both art and activation, and speaking as a land manager of a park system, that's the channel we need to pursue. And it feels like we often, every time we want to think about a temporary activation, we have to kind of start from scratch on how to fund it. And it would be nice if, I get permanent art and it's fantastic and important, but I wonder whether the city could figure out a way to be a little bit more nimble in that regard.
I would love that idea. As you know, it took us about 6 years to get the Public Art Trust, which allows developers to give money to the Arts Commission if they don't want to put it on their site. So it is, of course, possible. As you know, it just takes a while to get through the bureaucracy in our city. But it's what we are talking about often at the Arts Commission. And there are other now pools of money with Prop B, et cetera, and there are individual artist grants. So there are other ways that we can work around doing temporary work too, as we start thinking about changes to legislation.
Hi, my name is Liz Diaz. Thank you guys for being up there.
Thank you so much for all the stuff that you do, and that I appreciate when I drive around the city a lot, day or night. It's wonderful. But what I actually do and why I'm here is I have a project that I call Canvas Houses, and I've designed and created a micro dwelling for homeless people that's furnished that I'd like to put over homeless people. But one of the points of the project is, and here's how I phrase my question. What do you think about a collaborative pilot project combining public art on temporary tensile homeless dwellings that could be appreciated by the community and where they would stand?
First of all, that is an awesome. The minute you said dwellings, micro dwellings, I was like, ding. That would be an amazing idea, and I feel like symbolically it would have so much. It would have so much to. It would just be such a feel-good thing, especially because a lot of artists that would be appropriate, or a lot of artists that can utilize that opportunity, are being out-migrated from the city. A lot of our artists are, and I feel like something symbolic would be represented in that partnership around providing housing for people and providing an opportunity for often overlooked or underutilized art forms. So I think that's a great idea. I'd love to give you my card to see if we can figure something out.
Hi, I'm Kevin Arnold. I run Noise Pop Industries, the music and concert promoter here in town.
Yes. Yes.
Hi guys, yeah, I worked or know most of you, I think, and appreciated and benefited from your works and stuff for many years, so thanks for that very much. On that note, I guess my main question I'd sort of love to hear from anybody who'd want to comment is how do you see music, and in particular, let's say popular music, the kind I think that you referenced, Tyra, sort of fitting into the realm of public art. As a music concert and event promoter, you know, for especially in the Bay Area here, we see that, you know, a lot of our local musicians and bands still struggle to live here and make their way, much like many visual artists or you know, any other media really, I think, and you know, also feel to a degree that this music is as non-traditional art, sort of outside of this world, and so I'm wondering if you have thoughts about ways that it might be fit into the equation and what its role might be.
Well, I totally understand what you're saying. It's interesting because the population in a city really dictates the art, right? How it's funded, who supports it. The way I program Bayview, even though it's considered a historically Black community, it's much more of a struggle because there's not a lot of Black people in San Francisco, or urban people, or urban appreciators, than if I did the same thing in Oakland. It would be packed out, no doubt. So all that kind of dictates how the music scene is moving in San Francisco, and frankly how the public art scene is moving, and that's a real issue because a lot of what made San Francisco what it was a lot of ground up art. That makes art really, that sets a tone culturally around the world, the grassroots artists. So it's a challenge. I would say that leveraging partnerships is key for what I do. Working with Bizzler, you know some of these names, working with Empire, which is huge. It's going to really help my cause in terms of the marketing piece. Marketing is key for me. So, but it's a real struggle because it's hard to get the formula right.
I would really love to be able to include music in the public art. It's the same issue around temporary art. With all my own projects, Language of the Birds, Crusoe's Dream, we always have an opening performance. We had 13 pianists play for our opening. We had opera singers. We had a composer who composed music especially for the opening. And so I would love to have more. We used to be a city that had so much street performers. When I moved here, there was burlesque, and it was that things were happening on the street all the time, and that's gone. You know, the circuses, all those types of things. And I would love to be able to fund that kind of work and fund it through public art and have that type of engagement, because the performative part of public art allows people to engage with the artwork in a different way. It allows them to see it, remember it, and then tell that story to other people. And that's what we did with Crusoe's Dream, because a lot of people didn't know who Crusoe was. They were like, what is this thing hanging over them, you know? And so through that performance, where we had 800 people in a street closure, and people came, most of them dressed in costume, and they got into it, and then they went home and told other people. And that's the way of engaging people in public art in a way that just putting artwork doesn't do.
That's an inspiring way to wrap up. As a reminder that we have a heritage in this town of kind of every form of art and weirdness and invention. It's kind of who we believe ourselves to be, and it's really this group that helps us get back to that as much as possible in the public realm and as diverse a mechanism as possible. So thank you guys so much for coming, and for all of you for supporting all of this. And I'm going to turn it back over now to our host.